Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and put in a 5-star review would be really appreciated. You can reach me, of course, if you have comments, thoughts, suggestions for new shows. Yes, even criticisms. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. This past week, I've been pretty busy. Of course, this has been a holiday week because we had President's Day. Of course, I'm sure most of you didn't have President's Day, but even though I had President's Day off and my day job, was doing some things, getting some medical stuff attended to, but also a lot of traveling this week. So I had, on my day job, I had the opportunity to visit with EPA folks, and of course, if you've been following what the EPA has been involved in, they've been revising or proposing to revise rodenticide label standards within the United States. And so this would be a significant modification to label requirements for a lot of structural and what I would call recreational area use of rodenticides. What I mean by that is places like golf courses, ornamental and turf type situations. Recreation in terms of those outdoor areas that are heavily human impacted. Some of the proposed changes don't have a significant impact on the agricultural use of rodenticides. Those are already fairly restrictive, primarily because of the issue with plant uptake of pesticides. We don't have a lot of those tolerances. So if we don't have those tolerances, we can't use the pesticide. But for those of you in the structural use of rodenticides and in the ornamental and turf use of rodenticides, those changes, the proposed changes, I want to be careful about this, the proposed changes were kind of a shock, and they would substantially increase the amount of work to your business. Now, I've done a podcast on this. You can certainly go back and search for that, but I have a little bit of an update here, namely that I was under the impression, and it's the mistaken impression, that I thought these changes would have been implemented perhaps this summer, maybe November of this year. And when talking with the officials from the EPA, they said, "Oh, no. We're going to make an interim proposal." So they have an initial preliminary proposal. There's comments. They come out with an interim decision. Then there's going to, of course, be more comment back and forth, and they're saying the implementation of these new rules may not happen till 2025 at the earliest, and maybe even later than that, depending on the lawsuits that can occur from either the environmental groups or from industry groups. So take that as you will. So it looks like nothing is happening this year that's going to impact your business. Nevertheless, those of you in the structural field with rodenticides and the ornamental and turf field, these are times that you need to be thinking about, your level of political involvement, and maybe thinking about how would this impact your business. Maybe you need to start experimenting with some things now, depending on how these labels are going to be changed, because even if half the proposed decisions were made, it will likely increase your cost of doing business because you'll lose certain efficiencies with your rodenticides. So maybe you need to start experimenting now and finding out how would this work for my business so you can have a leg up on your competition. But I'll just leave that with you. Of course, this is my website, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com, and you can certainly buy materials there. We have a store. Let me kind of pull that up here for you. And just little things that, primarily a lot of publications, of course, but I also have a consultation section, the old edition of the Vertebrate Pest Handbook, if you want to get the older edition of it. And then, of course, I'd also have the newer edition as well. So that's here, and if you want to get the new, so you can get the second edition if you wish, if you like that one better, or you can go to the new edition. So things clearly are being added to the website as I find things to come across I think are sort of different and unique. We'd love to have you check that out. Well, this week I don't have a lot to say. I've had quite the busy week, as you can imagine, in terms of the travel schedule that I had. So, but I did want to. I came across this particular article by a colleague that I know. Just in, truth in advertising here. I'm a PI, which is primary investigator. Oh gosh, I forgot the technical term for it. My mistake. So it's when you're on a grant. When you're in a grant and you apply, there are people called the PI, and it's primary investigator, the primary initiator, something like that. So I've been on a grant with her. So she is a professor. I think she's an associate professor. I don't know if she's been fully promoted yet. I think she was going up for 10 years. So I think she's associate now. I think she did pass. So she would be an associate professor at the University of Oregon. And she is a wildlife specialist, primarily in the area of ecology, and she's getting, of course, involved in wildlife damage management. Well, she published sort of an extension publication, and what they do in the Northeast, University of Oregon. Let me make sure I get the universities correct here, so that people don't yell at me. Okay, Oregon State University, University of Idaho, Washington State University. So Dr. Sanchez is at Oregon State University. And they sort of collaborate among the three states, which is really kind of clever and smart because it saves a lot of duplication of resources, of course. So here in the Pacific Northwest, they share publication costs. And that way they have one publication rather than each state having its own individual publication, let's say on raccoons or something. They'll just have one, and it'll be good for all three states, which is really, really smart in terms of maximizing resources. Because extension it's under some pressure in some areas, so it's a really smart thing. Well, anyways, she has written this publication called Manage Wildlife Conflicts in Your Home and Garden. Now, if you're not familiar with extension, before I went to the University of Nebraska, I really didn't have a clue what extension really was. And so extension is the part of the land-grant university system in major universities where they take research-based information and then adapt it to be applicable and apply that for the average individual. So they are, in a sense, the information aggregators and simplifiers, not to make it simplistic, but to tell people what the bottom line is with the information and then apply it in a way that's practical in the real world. And so they really have an important responsibility there to take this highbrow research done by a lot of the faculty at these universities, then they'll take that information and say, all right, here's how this can make your life better or solve a particular problem. And so she is in that that space. So she is a primary researcher, and she's also has an extension appointment as well. So she's bridging the high-end research side of things, as well as she is someone who is adapting information to make it available and useful for the average person. And so it's really, so she has this sort of dual job here, do the primary research as well as apply it to the real world. Well, she wrote this article, Manage Wildlife Conflicts in Your Home and Gardens. It was published in 2019, and you're certainly certainly able to download this and just do a little search for it. Her name is Dana Sanchez. It's D-A-N-A. Let me kind of blow that up for you here so you can see it a little bit easier. Right? Dana Sanchez. And Sanchez. So Dr. Dana Sanchez, Oregon State University. Make sure I get that correct. Yes, Oregon State University. And this article was published in 2019. Now, for those of you who are in wildlife control, there is nothing earth-shattering here, right? So I'm not telling you about this particular publication that says, oh, this is going to solve your problem. This is going to help make you a better wildlife control operator. I'm telling you about this particular publication because I think she has a very interesting way of packaging the information for your customer. I am not a great salesperson. Anyone who knows me is I am not the best salesperson, right? So I tend to give too much information. I have trouble with the close. I'm not a very good marketer. So finding ways to phrase things that make it easier for your customer to understand plays a significant role in helping turn them into a customer or to convince them of your perspective, right? Because you have an important job of helping them resolve a conflict with wildlife. And you have an important job, and so they called you because they need your help. They want to hire you. So our job is to make them comfortable so that they feel that they've made a good decision. And our job is not to be a barrier to that. Our job is to give them a sense of comfort and confidence that they are not going to regret hiring you. Okay, very, very important. So here's what she talks about here in terms of how do we prevent and manage damage from wildlife? And so I use the technical term habitat modification, right? That's not going to mean anything to a customer, right? So we have to simplify it, right? And so I really like the way she's done this. So rather than saying habitat modification, which is, the scientific phrase, that lingo that we use in our wildlife control industry, certainly I'm part of that problem. Well, when we're talking to our customer, they don't know exactly what that means. So she starts off with, one thing you can do is block access. How do we stop this animal damage problem? Well, if they can't reach the area where they're causing damage, they're not going to cause damage anymore, right? We're locking the door. And so she calls it blocking access. Love that, right? So this is something you may want to incorporate in some of your literature. The next step, or the next option for managing wildlife damage, is to deter the damage. So maybe there's a situation where they don't really care if there's a few animals around. They just want less animals around. Well, that's an issue of deterrence. Can we make it harder for an animal to feel comfortable there? And so therefore, you're only going to get those animals that are truly dedicated to be there. And so that's a deterrence aspect. And so we have blocking access. Now we have deterring them from a particular area. And then the third category that she's talking about, of course, is animal removal. And so depending on your state regulations, that could be removed to kill, it could be removed to relocate, or removed to translocate, right? So it's important for you to be able to break this down, the options for your client. And so I like that 3-option approach, right? We're either going to block access, we're going to deter them, remove them, or a combination of all three options, right? That is something that everyone can understand. It's accurate, it's fair, it's not simplistic, it's not making this seem easier than it is, but it's not making a barrier, not making it so technical and so complicated that it's hard for your customer to grasp. So, big fan of this. Definitely props to Dr. Sanchez for this, for the way that she's phrased this. And of course, you're welcome to read the rest of this publication on your own. Let me just sort of remind you again what this is all about. The title is Manage Wildlife Conflicts in Your Home and Garden by Dr. Dana Sanchez. It's DanaSanchez. And this is a Pacific Northwest Extension publication published in 2019. And of course, Dr. Sanchez is at the Oregon State University, where she is, I believe, an associate professor there. I think she just got tenure recently. So to repeat that all again, maybe this is a way to package your sales spiel or get some lingo in your sales spiel, that you're going to block access, you're going to deter them, and you're going to remove them. So I really like that 3-step options. Maybe you will too. Of course, you're free to tweak that in terms of your sales approach, but perhaps saying habitat modification is not the best way to convert the sale, and maybe go to block access, deter them, and then ultimately remove them, which is, of course, your typically your lethal control, but not always. Well, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. I do hope you've enjoyed this particular session. We are a podcast dedicated to providing technical, research-based information on wildlife damage issues. Some of you may call it vertebrate pest control, animals with a spine. So that's what I deal with. So if you're looking for some other helps, of course, my company, Wildlife Control Consultant, gets involved in ghostwriting. I do research. I do training events, whether it be webinars or in person. So if you're looking for perhaps a different perspective, perhaps doing some writing on some of your company's literature or protocols, or maybe even you need someone to organize your photographs, right? To get them to where you can actually use them in the future, get them water stamped and that sort of thing. Definitely watermarked, I should say. Definitely you can reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Also, if you have thoughts for new shows, criticisms, perhaps you like what you do like about a show, what you don't like about a show, suggestions, of course, for new shows, perhaps you even want to be on the show. Always looking for guest speakers. I think there's a lot of great information that you folks have in terms of your day-to-day operations. A lot of you are running companies where you're trying to sell a product. We'd love to have you talk about your product and show, because I think we don't have good information exchange within the wildlife control industry, and this is a way to get started. So again, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.